I apologize in advance for some of the books that are going to be on this list, but it was a really hard list to put together, and I feel like that says something in itself. Hi, my name is Sarah Freshley, and welcome back to Freshly Read Books. So before we get started, I just want to say that these books being on this list doesn't mean that I think they're terrible or anything. It's just that they weren't doing it for me personally, and they've made it to the list because I might have found them boring, I might have just found them disappointing from what I expected, or there are some books on this list that I found actively annoying. And you can feel free to come for me for any of these books. I'm not gonna wholeheartedly defend my opinion on most of them because there are people that have different tastes than me, and that's totally fine. I don't think that you should dislike these books just because I dislike these books, but we're just here to have fun, have a good time, and to talk about my 10 least favorite books of 2021. Oh, okay, let's get started. So I'll be going from 10th place to first place, the first place being the book that I disliked the most out of this year. So first up, something that really pains my heart is Survive the Night by Riley Sager. It pains my heart in that I'm sad that it's on this list. So this is my 10th place book, and really the main reason this is here is just because it was such a big disappointment for me. I love Riley Sager's books, the ones that I've read so far. I've had so much fun reading them, and they seem to get better as I read, but this one's the one that came out in 2021, and I just didn't like it. And I know you're not supposed to take in prior expectations when reading a book, and so maybe this book shouldn't be on this list, but I'm sorry, I'm human. And I'm trying to go purely based off the feelings I had while I was reading the book, and I had some pretty negative feelings while reading this book, so it's on the list. In 9th place is a book that I don't even want to mention. And I'd like to say when I originally put this list of books together, I was going through all of my books, just kind of writing down the ones that I thought might show up on the list. And I had, I think, 8 books originally. So then I had to go back through thinking, all right, those are the worst, but what's almost there? And then that's when this and Survive the Night showed up on the list. So bear that in mind. I didn't even look back that distastefully at my experience reading this book. But this list has to be made up of 10 books because I don't know, that's what I chose. I guess I could have chosen to do 8, but whatever, we're here now. Okay, just rip the Band-Aid off, Sarah. In 9th place, I have The Obelisk Gate, which is this book of the Broken Earth trilogy. I didn't want to take these books out of the thing. But it's probably fitting that we talk about the entire series. And I feel so bad because people love this trilogy. They love this trilogy. And I wanted badly to love it. But I should have known, the chances were so low because I don't really like high fantasy. But when I love it, I love it. And I was hoping that this would be one of those for me. But it just wasn't. And I should have admitted that after I read the 5th season. But there were parts of it that I was still kind of into, and then by the second book, I basically just forced myself through it. And then at the end of it, I had to be all right, do you really want to do that again? With a 3rd book? That's just ridiculous to do this to yourself. You don't like this book series, and that's okay. You hear that? It's okay that I didn't like this. I know I said that you could come for me for any of these books, but not this one, because I feel really bad about this one. You can tell how much I wanted to love this series just based off the fact that I bought all 3 books before reading any of them. But I still have hope for Curtis really liking the series, which is why I still own it. So I've just put it on his bookshelf. At number 8, we have Redhead by the Side of the Road by Anne Tyler. This is one of the books from the Booker 2020 long list that I hadn't finished yet, so I finished this year. I had committed to reading the entire list, but I was just really slow about it. In my defense, there were 2 third books of trilogies, and one of those trilogies was Wolf Hall. Very large books. So I did finally finish that list, and one of those was Redhead by the Side of the Road, which is on this list purely because it was really boring. And I'm a firm believer that books can be boring in a really good way. Sometimes I really like a boring or mundane book. This was not that. I just felt like it wasn't saying anything, the characters weren't good, and it was boring. And all of those criticisms, each one of them doesn't really amount to be enough for me to think a book is bad. But when you've got all of them together and there's no redeeming qualities, at least in my opinion, about the book, then you just have a not very good book. At number 7, I've got We Believed in Mermaids by Barbara O'Neill. This book is set in New Zealand, which honestly was my favorite part about it and probably the only part I liked about it. I have just had this very strong urge to go to New Zealand that probably stemmed from watching Flight of the Conchords one too many times. The more I learn about New Zealand, the more I want to go. Also, like, how cool would it be to visit the Shire? All right, I'll stop. So despite this book having a very interesting premise, which is about a pair of sisters that grow up in California, and then one of them goes missing and is presumed dead, but then she shows up in like the background of a news segment that's being shot in New Zealand. So her sister that's in California still sees that, and this is like years and years after she's gone missing, and she flies to New Zealand to find her. So it's like kind of a little bit of a mystery to it, and also there's like travel that's involved, so I love that. Oh, and also there was like a romance thrown in, but the main problem for me for this book was just the characters fell really flat. Like so flat that they were one-dimensional. They were super inconsistent, and their motivations for the most part were weird at best and non-existent at worst. At number 6, we have The War of the Poor, which was on the 2021 International Booker Prize shortlist. And at just 60-something pages long, it set out to look at poverty at different points of history, specifically pertaining to religion and how religion wasn't really serving the people that it was meant to, because it asked for a lot of money from people who had none. And considering the whole point is supposed to be to give to those who are less fortunate, it seems pretty hypocritical of those higher ups. So the premise of this book seemed really interesting to me, but the execution was poor. At number 5, we have Big Summer by Jennifer Weiner. This book was kind of all over the place for me, and so it didn't seem to accomplish any one of the things that it set out to. It's a mystery, it's a romance, it's a contemporary, it's about body positivity, but I don't think it did any one of those things very well. It was really weird. Like, you get halfway through the book and you're like, sorry, is this a mystery book? Excuse me? Because it hasn't been up till this point. Number 4, we've got People Like Her by Ellery Lloyd. This was actually one of the first books that I read for the year, and I spent the entire time being really annoyed at the main character. This is something that I think a lot of thrillers can fall prey to. I think it's hard to write a likable character that's like the protagonist of a thriller novel, but while a thriller main character can be not likable, I think that they shouldn't be insanely annoying. And I found the main character of this book to be insanely annoying. At number 3, we have Children of Chicago by Cynthia Pelayo. We're starting to get into those books that like really annoyed me. This one was actually the first book of a series. I'm not sure how long that series is going to be. So I think part of this book's downfall was really just like the ending in general, because obviously the end of a first book of a series, it's not going to wrap everything up, but you wanted to wrap something up and then also give you the incentive to want to read the future books. I didn't get either one of those things. I felt like nothing got wrapped up. It felt very similar to how I felt in the middle of the book, which was, I don't want to read this anymore. Except at that point I was at the end of a book and the decision was, do I want to pick up a whole nother book like this? And no, I don't. Thank you. Okay, number 2, we have No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. Oh boy. Am I ready to talk about this book again? If you don't know, I have a whole video talking about this book and why I didn't like it. So you can check that out, but I'll try my best to sum up my feelings right now, but also maybe like provide some new and more removed perspective from when I initially finished the book. So my main problem with this book is that it felt like, to me, it was really pandering to the reader, and I absolutely despise any form of media that feels like it's doing that. It seemed to me that the message was really spoon-fed, and I just want to be trusted as the reader to be able to get something without it being like really obviously shown to me. So the first half of this book is in these short little snippets that feel kind of like tweets. And so like these are kind of more silly and they might sometimes touch on more serious topics, but for the most part, it's a very lighthearted tone that's kind of like, haha, look at like the silly way that the internet is. And then the second half of the book feels a lot more like a traditional novel where we're getting a story and it's a lot more serious and it's much more removed or disconnected from the internet. So the problem for me is that these all felt very shallow to me. Like there wasn't a lot of depth given to this. It didn't touch on what I think are the very large nuances of the internet, and instead it felt like it was kind of recycling things that had been thought of and talked about in regards to the internet for at least the past 10 years, if not longer, which for the internet is essentially ancient history. Like 10 years on the internet, so much happens and the viewpoint of things changes so drastically. Now, all of that being said, there are people that feel very differently than I do about this book, and many of those people are people that I share common interests with in books, and I very much respect their book opinions. So as much as I selfishly want to say don't read this book if you haven't already, I can't do that because you might love it, and that's okay. I still want to be friends. And then finally, my least favorite book of 2021 was All the Ugly and Wonderful Things by Bryn Greenwood.
Get rid of that thing.
I hated this book. Like I hated almost all of my time reading this book. It was bad. It kind of felt like the whole premise of it was like, how do we get people on board with a pedophilic relationship? Like, how can we set up a young girl and an adult man in a way that the audience, the readers, are like, yeah, I want them to end up together at the end. And like, obviously there's more to it than that. I know that the guy really helps the girl throughout her childhood to the point where he becomes kind of like a father figure, but that's even worse because it really feels like grooming when you're looking back on it later. And even if that wasn't his intention, that's definitely where it goes. And also really didn't like how early on in her life that the next phase of their relationship, I'll say, started. Like, it's, I hated it. I hated it so much. I hated it so much I don't want to talk about it anymore. So those are my 10 least favorite books of 2021. Again, just because I didn't like these books doesn't mean you won't or didn't if you read them already. In fact, I'd love to hear if you read any of the books on this list, what you thought of them, and then also what's your least favorite book from this year. We can have a nice conversation about this. It's totally fine. Anyways, please do consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one. So my camera died literally while I was saying bye, and I only have one battery for this camera, so I just had to charge it all so that I could tell you bye.